Hebrew Israelites. Arguably, one of the most misunderstood subjects in modern history. Often overshadowed by false information and baseless speculation. With very few researchers and investigators taking the time to read old references for themselves, and instead relying on the opinion of others. Yah willing, in this series, we will put an end to the confusion and an end to the lies. By reviewing and reading over 100 references and artifacts, proving beyond a shadow of doubt who the true children of Judah are today, and reveal what prophecy has in store for the world, for what they have done to the Most High Yah's chosen people. We began by visiting an institution of higher learning, and here we find an old professor reading old books about the Jews. And no, he's not black, Hebrew, Israelite. However, he sees a shocking truth hidden in plain sight. The truth that the old books describe the Jews as black. In his book, The Image of the Black in Jewish Culture by Professor Abraham Malbim, a professor at the Department of Jewish History and Thought at the University of Haifa in Israel. In his book, he writes, and I quote, "A strong European tradition dating back to the Middle Ages maintained that Jews were black, or at least swarthy, and find sharp expression in modern anti-Semitic literature. You see, old books describe the Hebrews as black. This is not something made up by black people in America in the 1800s or the 1900s. Now, in his book, History in Black, African Americans in Search of an Ancient Past by Professor Yaakov Shavit, a professor of the history of the Jewish people at Tel Aviv University. And in his book, he writes, and I quote, "In medieval literature, a theory prevailed in which the Jews were part of the black race, or were at least dark-skinned. As you can see, the idea that the Hebrews were black dates back at least to medieval times and persisted into the 19th century. Professor Tudor Parfit at the Department of Religious Studies at Florida International University, in his book, Black Jews in Africa and the Americas, he writes, and I quote, "The idea that the Jews were black persisted into the 19th century." And he goes on to say, 19th century physical anthropologists in general assumed that Jews had a close racial, that is, blood connection with blacks. You see, in general, it was a common understanding during medieval times that the Hebrews were black. And maybe you're wondering, was commonly understood during medieval times that the Brews were black, then why are they considered white today? Why is it anti-Semitic to call them what they once were? Well, to answer that question, we need to take a trip to Israel. Land of Israel, home to Christianity and home to Islam. The homeland of the Brews.
The homeland of the Hebrews, it's not this particular shit, not this thing they built up. This is a fake one they built up. The real one doesn't stand anymore.
We'll begin our march to 100 proofs on the streets of Jerusalem. Here we can find rabbis as they walk along the cobbled streets of the capital city. We follow this rabbi to our first proof, the language of Israel, called Hebrew, which is a Semitic language, also called an Afro-Asiatic language. Semitic Afro-Asiatic languages can be found in North and Central Africa. Hence the name Afro-Asiatic. The prefix Afro in Afro-Asiatic is short for African. We also note that the language of the Brews was formerly called Hemito-Semitic or Semito-Hamitic. The language of the Brews is an African and Asiatic language. Our next proof can be found in Egypt. You see, Egypt is where the children of Israel served as slaves. And today, in the Brickmeyer tomb, we can find depictions of Semitic people toiling while making bricks. With loins girded, these dark-skinned Semites are pictured in the various stages of brick making. Now, notice how the color of some of the dark Semites has worn off. However, if you look closely, you can still find the dark complexion of an African people. is also found in Egypt. It involves research performed by Dr. Samuel George Morton. The racist Dr. Morton analyzed nearly 600 skulls related to Egypt. In his book, Observations on Egypt Ethnography, he notes that the skeletal remains of the Negro can be found in many places in Egypt, and that they built the pyramids. And the following reference reads, I have been enabled to make extensive and satisfactory comparisons by means of nearly 600 human crania, which form a part of my private anatomical collection. And the next page reads, the true Negro conformation requires no comment, but it is necessary to observe that a practiced eye readily detects a few heads with decidedly mixed characters, in which those of the Negro predominate. For these, I propose the name of Negroid crania. We proceed in the next place to analyze these crania individually, arranging them for the purpose of convenience into 7 series according to their sepulchral localities. From the Memphite necropolis, Pyramid of 5 Steps, Saqqara generally, front of the brick pyramid of Dosha, northwest of the Pyramid of 5 Steps, Tura on the Nile. Second series from the grottos of Mabdek. Third series from Abydos. Fourth series from the catacombs of Thebes. Fifth series from Kum on Bos. Sixth series from the island of Beger near Sphila. Seventh series from Bedob in Nubia. Now, these are just some of the locations of the Negro skulls in Egypt. Dr. Morton's analysis of nearly 600 Egyptian skulls not only confirmed the presence of Negroes in Egypt, it also helped confirm who built the pyramids. As the following reference reads, we have the most unequivocal evidence, historical and monumental, that slavery was among the earliest of social institutions of Egypt, and that it was imposed on all conquered nations, white as well as black. So numerous was this unfortunate class of persons that it was the boast of Egyptian kings recorded by Diodorus that the vast structures of Luxor and Karnak were erected by the labor of foreigners alone. Of Negro slavery in particular, the paintings and the sculptures give abundant illustration. Where the bones of the Negroes can be found scattered throughout the land. During the time of the Pharaohs, and based on the manner in which they were buried, we know that they served in Egypt as slaves. And who was it that served as slaves in Egypt? That's right, family. It was Yisrael. So now, on to our fifth proof. And for our fifth proof, we will return to the land of Yisrael. And we visit Judah's royal city of Lachish, where in 701 BC, King Sennacherib led his massive army against Judah's fortified city of Lachish. King Sennacherib conquered the city of Lachish. A stone monument was made to commemorate the defeat of this city of Judah. And on this stone relief, we find depictions of what occurred on that fateful day. We can see Assyrians taking loot from the royal city, carrying away various artifacts for reward. We also find detailed depictions of the chosen, set-apart people of Judah. And when we look close, we find the face of the Negro. The city of Lachish also contained a mass gravesite in which excavators recovered roughly 695 skulls. This leads us to our sixth proof, the skulls of Judah in the royal city. As the following reference reads, and it reads, the very first report on the Lachish skulls included a thorough examination of pathology, metrics, artificial deformation, and epigenetic affinity. Utilizing craniometrics, Risden in 1939 concluded that the group was very similar to dynastic Egyptian material. In fact, he stated that the entire population was of foreign origin, representing descendants of a group derived primarily from Upper Egypt. This conclusion was subsequently supported by a craniometric study by Musgrave and Evans in 1981. Keita in 1988 likewise examined the skulls metrically, omitting those that were either artificially deformed, female, warped, split, or juvenile, using only those measurements that he believed were consistent population discriminators. He concluded that the group was fairly heterogeneous, having close relationships to North African, Egyptian, and Nubian groups, thus lending support to the Egypto-Nubian presence. Researchers go on to suggest that these Nubians weren't Egyptian foreigners at all. They suggested that they were native to the region. Our next proof involves the Judean city, Masada. Attacked by Rome after 70 AD. And after sacking the city of Jerusalem, Rome advanced to Masada. And as they advanced, some Druze decided to take their own lives instead of dying by the hands of the Romans. Excavations at Masada revealed the remains of the people of Judah. For example, located on the lower terrace in the northern palace of Masada, archaeologists discovered the remains of 3 bodies close together. As the following reference reads, and it reads, one of the bodies, Yadin said, was that of a man of about 20, perhaps one of the commanders of Masada. Next to him were armor scales, dozens of arrows, an inscribed potsherd, and fragments of a prayer shawl. Nearby on a plaster floor stained with what looked like blood was the skeleton of a young woman. Her hair was still preserved, beautifully plaited or braided as if it had just been freshly coiffed. Her sandals also were preserved next to her body. The third body, Yadin said, was that of a child. The woman's hair didn't just consist of braids. It included the scalp, which contained locks, which is characteristic of the Negro hair. As the following reference reads, and it reads, this hair was subsequently taken to the Forensic Science Division of the Israel National Police for analysis. Skipping ahead, the forensic analysis revealed the braid plaits of the hair had been severed by a sharp instrument. Further, the length of the hair and the curvature formed by the proximal ends of the plaits indicates that they were severed close to the scalp. The cut ends of some dresses exhibited a step-like pattern. The random pattern of the cut locks and the steps are consistent with erratic movement of the head in relation to the cutting instrument. In other words, the head was probably in motion while the hair was being sheared. What could account for the presence in the northern palace of an entire head of hair shorn from a woman? In addition to the braids and the locks found at Masada, the skeletons found at the site matched skeletons found at the Hever Valley site. And the Hever Valley site was said to contain skeletons of the Bruise. As the following reference reads, and reads, the skeleton type is identical with that discovered in the caves of the Hever Valley. And it continues and it reads, the archaeological findings led to the conclusion that these skeletons, as well as the skeletons found by Aharonai in 1954 in the Nahal Hever Cave, and probably those found by Aharonai and Yadin in later expeditions to the Judean desert, are all remains of Jewish refugees from the War of Bar Kokhba against the Romans. The land of Israel was divided among each of the 12 tribes, with the tribe of Judah settling the land to the south. It is within the territory of the tribe of Judah we find the city of Lachish, which means the Bruise depicted in the Lachish relief are specifically the tribe of Judah. It is the tribe of Judah that's depicted as a Negro in the Lachish relief in roughly 701 BC. Not only that, roughly 104 years later, we then have another major event, the fall of Jerusalem to the king of Babylon, who takes the people of Judah, sends them to Babylon and to Spain. As the following reference reads, and it reads, the Spanish Jews maintained that they had been transported hither after the destruction of the temple by the Babylonian conqueror Nebuchadnezzar. Certain Jewish families, the Ibn Dawids and the Abarbanels, boasted descent from the royal house of David and maintained that their ancestors had been settled since the time immemorial, partly in the district of Lucena and partly in the environs of Toledo and Seville. The numerous Spanish Jewish family of Nasi also traced back its pedigree to King David. So family, knowing that the tribe of Judah, shown in the Lachish relief as a Negro, was sent to Spain roughly 104 years later, then what should we expect the Bruise of Spain to look like? Answer, we should expect the Bruise of Spain to look like the Bruise shown on the Lachish relief. We should expect the Bruise of Spain and Portugal to look like Negroes. As the following reference reads, and it reads, the Spanish Jew is always dark complexion. And the next reference reads, and it reads, in his habit and manners, very formal, a tall, thin, very black man, like a Spaniard or Jew about 50 years old. We note the skulls excavated in Lachish were skulls of black people, and the skulls of the Bruce in Spain were also skulls of black people. They were dolichocephalic. And the following reference reads, and it reads, the Negroid type is primarily represented by the Negro of Africa, between the Sahara and the Cape District, including Madagascar. The skin varies from dark brown to brown black, with eyes of similar dark hue, and hair usually black and always crisp or woolly. The skull is narrow, dolichocephalic. And the next reference reads, and it reads, of the other skulls investigated, it appears that most of those derived from Sephardim, or Spanish and Portuguese Jews, are dolichocephalic. And the next reference reads, and it reads, the same variability occurs in other finds, but the skulls of most of the Sephardim, or Spanish and Portuguese Jews, are dolichocephalic. So if you ever wondered, why are the Brews of Spain and Portugal black? It's because they were shown as black people in the Lachish relief. Again, the Lachish relief shows Brews of Spain roughly 104 years before they were sent to Spain. All right, well, let's review. We began by reviewing the language of the Brews, and we learned that the Semitic language was an Afro-Asiatic language, or an African-Asiatic language. We then took a close-up look at the Hebrew slaves painted on the walls of Egypt, and we learned that they were a dark-skinned people. And we also learned that the skulls of the Brews could be found throughout Egypt in many locations during the time of the pharaohs. And we also learned that after identifying the Negro in Egypt, they were identified as some of the builders of the pyramids. We next took a look at the Lachish relief, which contained a detailed description of the Brews. We then reviewed the skulls of Lachish, which also identified the skulls of an African people, identified as Egypto-Nubian. We also reviewed Masada archaeological findings to discover the hair of an African people. And finally, we identified the connection between the Brews in Lachish and the royal Brews of Spain and Portugal. Well, family, hopefully you've learned a lot. And most high Yah willing, we will shift our focus to the Brews of Spain and Portugal in the next episode of 100 Proof. And as always, thank you to those that continue to lift me.
And as far as the Brews in Portugal, we was in Portugal together, and then they actually went to Africa and all over the world, including America, because the Spanish king wanted us to switch to Christianity, and he actually was using us as warriors to collect everybody's debt that they owed him. So, of course, the whole world already hated us. That's how that works, right? And then, when we decided we weren't going to do it no more, we definitely was not going to take Christianity. Some actually did convert, which is stupid. But those probably all been whited out by now, if you know what I mean. But anyhow, yeah, they was in West Africa, North Africa for a while. And then, but that was only some, because the rest went all over the world. These Spaniards literally went all over the world. The Portuguese are the Spaniards. Went all over the world, literally going after all the Israelites from all over the world. It goes from King David, who was in North America, or was it South America? It was South America. That also goes to everybody, to Moshe, who was actually in the Americas over here, all right, and many others. And of course, our sisters and brothers who were also related to King David, who were in Africa at one point as well. So, and there's also Africa in America, and that's in East America. So, that's the place they call Africa is not real Africa. That's actually fake Africa, and the Africans don't even call it Africa. So, yes, we were here, we were there, we were everywhere. Why? Because we left all over the world to get away from the Spaniard, who was the Portuguese, who was trying to force Christianity on us, and we chose not to do that Christianity. So eventually he kidnapped a young black boy, that's y'all call us, right? One of our Israelite babies, raised him up, taught him Christianity from a Catholic pope, and he learned it better than all the rest of the other Catholics people, and they was amazed and astonished at the things that he said. Why? Because he taught it better than they could. And they brainwashed this boy so that he can believe that he was creator. But how they tricked him was they had him serve their creator, Mr. Z, and they had him serve the creator's son, Mr. J, who was actually the devil's son. So this guy's running around saying he's the Most High and claiming that the Most High is Mr. J, who is the devil. And as we know, Mr. J is the son of Mr. Z. So it was all a ruse, and then they sent them over here against